Marvel fans, comic geeks, and all the nerds in between. It is Megan with Vigilante Vibes. I am here for another character breakdown, and I am continuing my coverage of Marvel's most underrated mutants. And I could not talk about this mutant. So today I want to talk about Mimic. So Calvin Rankin, aka Mimic. His first appearance was in X-Men number 19 in 1966 and was created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. So he has been around for a minute. So Calvin Rankin was a scientist's kid. His dad was always messing around with seriously risky experiments. Naturally, Calvin wasn't allowed into the lab, you know, where all the dangerous stuff was cooking. But come on, he was a kid. He was gonna get in. Curiosity totally got the better of him. One day he snuck into his dad's quarters and he accidentally knocked over a beaker full of some experimental chemicals. Whoops. It instantly formed a reddish gas, and yeah, he breathed it all in as the stories go. This little accident messed up his body in a huge way. Over the next months and years, Calvin started noticing he could mimic the abilities of anyone nearby, which is pretty cool. Fast forward a bit, and Calvin became the ultimate jock. He was the best at every sport because he was secretly copying the skills of all the top players. His powers blew up, and so did his ego. He got super hot-headed and arrogant. Unsurprisingly, his friends and classmates started to seriously dislike him, even calling him some kind of robot. Calvin ended up losing all of his buddies, but in his mind, it was not his fault. They were just jealous, and he was better than all of them anyway. So, there's that. When his father finally figured out what was going on, he knew it was only a matter of time before everyone else turned on his son. So, he moved them into an abandoned cave, hoping he could find a cure. For months, Calvin's dad slaved over a machine designed to strip away the mimicking powers and give Calvin a normal life. But he lied to Calvin, telling him the machine would make his copied powers permanent. Talk about bad timing. The townspeople found out about the construction in the abandoned mine, and a mob came after Calvin and his dad. To stop them from getting into the machine, Calvin's dad set off an explosion to seal the mine entrance. He very much misjudged the dynamite, though. It was way too powerful, and he was killed in the blast. Calvin managed to dig himself out and immediately swore he'd get revenge on the people who had forced all of this tragedy to happen. But he moved in there for you, though. But that's fine. Calvin, now nicknamed the Mimic, first ran into the X-Men while trying to steal a date with Vera Contour, who was seeing Hank McCoy, aka the Beast. Being the jerk that he was, Calvin 100% provoked Hank. The Beast was shocked when Calvin instantly developed his same furry defenses. When Bobby Drake, who is Iceman, tried to jump in, Calvin casually created and chucked a snowball at his head. Some construction workers saw the fight and thought Calvin was a mutant attacking two normal teens. And Calvin easily used his newfound powers to bolt out of there. He realized he had been fighting two X-Men, but got super annoyed when the powers he picked up started to fade. He hatched a new plan, find the rest of the X-Men, and use his father's buried machine to permanently steal all their abilities, which seems a little excessive to me. But I'm not in his shoes. Sometime later, he ran into the Jean Grey and followed her back to the X-Mansion. He came back the next day, and even though Professor X saw right through him, the X-Men knew a confrontation was inevitable. Calvin jumped into a fight and actually beat them all at first, but the team's coordination finally helped them gain the upper hand. Just as he was about to lose, Calvin managed to snatch Jean and escape back to the mine. He told her his whole origin story, hoping the others would follow. When the X-Men arrived, Calvin copied all their powers again, unearthed his dad's machine, and fired it up. The X-Men reached him before he could step in, but Calvin grabbed Professor X as a shield, which is kind of funny. He then flew into the activated machine. Instead of making his powers permanent, it stripped Calvin of them. Professor X managed to short-circuit the machine, causing the whole mine to explode. The X-Men dragged both of them to safety, and Xavier wiped Calvin's memories of the entire thing, hoping he could finally live a normal life. The following summer, Calvin was attending Metro College, which was the same place Jean Grey had transferred to. Their mutual friend, Ted Roberts, reintroduced them. Calvin had this nagging feeling he'd seen her before. Even though Jean tried to play it cool, Calvin was determined to figure out where he knew her from. Soon after, a nearby explosion restored both Calvin's memory and his mimicry powers. When Ted and Jean checked on him, they found his old, arrogant, egotistical self was back, and proud to be back. Meanwhile, Professor X needed more help against the new threat Factor 3, and when other big heroes said no, Calvin showed up at an X-Man meeting and basically demanded to join. Even though Calvin's goal was to somehow make the X-Men's powers permanent, Xavier let him join, because why not at this point? Because Cyclops was feeling guilty about an accident, he stepped down as deputy leader, and Xavier, seeing Calvin as the most powerful, gave the spot to him. On their first training mission, a villain called the Puppet Master took control of Calvin, trying to turn him into the ultimate soldier. Calvin was forced to fight his new team. When Puppet Master commanded him to kill the X-Men, Calvin fought the control with all his willpower, holding out just long enough for the injured Angel to swoop in and break the Puppet Master's hold. While his teammates cheered, Calvin finally realized the tragic truth. He was a guy who would always live in the shadow of other people's abilities. Calvin did his best as deputy leader to get ready for Factor 3, but he never really clicked with the rest of the team, especially Cyclops, who hated Calvin's recklessness. He showed his worth by beating the Ogre and the Banshee by mimicking Banshee's sonic scream, then beating the Ogre a second time by combining all the powers he had copied. A couple days later, Xavier pushed him hard in a training exercise. Tired and cranky, Calvin questioned Xavier's dream, why he should even care about the mutant cause. When Cyclops told him to back off, a brawl broke out between Calvin and the original 5 X-Men. Xavier eventually stepped in and told Calvin that he just couldn't overlook his arrogance, his combativeness, and massive ego, and that he needed to leave the school. Calvin got the message. No one wanted him there, and he left. Calvin came back a few hours later, intended to mouth off the X-Men. He had it planned. He was going to humble them. But instead, he found them all beaten down by the super adaptoid. Just as the adaptoid was about to finish them off, Calvin jumped into the fight, pretending he wanted the power, but really just trying to buy the X-Men time to recover. Sensing his will fading, he went all out, blasting the adaptoid with a full-on combo of all the X-Men's powers. Since the adaptoid was basically a walking version of the Avengers' powers, it quickly got the upper hand. But when it tried to copy Calvin's own unique mimic power, the borrowed X-Men powers rebounded into the adaptoid, just as Calvin had hoped. Weakened, the adaptoid threw the now power-drained Calvin to the ground before falling to the sea to regroup. Angel saved Calvin from a pretty nasty fall. After the battle, the X-Men apologized, and Calvin told them it was cool. Thinking his powers were gone for good this time, he said it was worth it because he finally learned the true value of friendship and how to become a man. Which is, great. Unfortunately, Calvin's powers came back, and this time more powerful than ever. They were now draining people and killing them. While the Beast was trying to find a cure, Calvin, Vera, and Hank were attacked by the Hulk. Calvin managed to absorb the Hulk's energy to protect the others, but it put him in a coma. Hank and Vera thought he was dead from the radiation, but days later Calvin woke up. He had copied Wolverine's healing factor, but he also copied his looks, his claws, even the adamantium. With the power seemingly permanent and the claw pain unbearable, Calvin went on a cross-country rampage, breaking into pharmacies to try and calm his constant rage. He eventually ran into the Hulk again, who was now the smart Mr. Fix-It version, and explained why he looked like Wolverine. The real Wolverine finally tracked him down, feeling partly responsible. Calvin and Logan teamed up on the Hulk, and they all ended up back at the cave where Calvin's dad had died. Turns out, the old machine was still active and had been emitting a pulse to keep Calvin's powers in check. It used its last bit of juice to bring them there before finally being destroyed. With the machine gone, Logan taught Calvin some Zen meditation to help suppress his powers. While the meditation helped, Calvin's powers were still uncontrollable, giving him all the original X-Men abilities permanently. Permanently means a lot. I feel like it doesn't mean as much as it actually means to Calvin, because I feel like a lot of things happen permanently and they're done, if that made sense. He went to a research station in Siberia where his late father's friends tried to study his powers. While he was away, the psychic villain Onslaught attacked the base. X-Force answered the distress call only to find bodies and a furious Calvin who blamed them for researchers' death. After a power blast, Onslaught kidnapped him. Onslaught stabilized Calvin's powers and fixed his mind, making the Mimic one of his loyal servants. Calvin had no clue Onslaught was behind the Serbia chaos. He teamed up with his new comrade, the Blob, and they faced X-Force again. In one mission, he was supposed to protect the mutant Risque from Mr. Sinister, but Onslaught was defeated by the X-Men and the Avengers. Mimic and Risque were captured and imprisoned by Operation Zero Tolerance for their terrorist work. Locked away in a secret Peruvian shield base, Calvin was regularly tortured. Because Calvin still carried Professor X's telepathic signature, the British superhero team Excalibur, who I love, was able to locate and free him, thinking they would find Xavier. He briefly joined their ranks and even went to Captain Britain's wedding. While on the team, he got close to Dr. Myra McTaggart, who was studying his behavior. They made an important discovery. A lot of Calvin's anger issues were actually due to undiagnosed bipolar disorder. He stuck with Excalibur until they disbanded, parting on good terms. With Professor X in jail for his role as Onslaught, the Mimic joined Mystique's Brotherhood of Mutants to help free him, working alongside some X-Men members. After the rescue, Calvin stayed with the team in San Francisco, fighting for mutant rights. He was later captured but pardoned by Valerie Cooper. He and his teammates lost their powers temporarily when the High Evolutionary used a device to halt all mutant abilities, but they got them back when the device was shut off. This version of the Brotherhood eventually broke up. Calvin decided to stay in San Francisco as a vigilante. Because of his history, he was captured by Baron Zemo and Songbird and thrown into a detention area. After the Civil War events, Calvin was freed, registered as a superhuman, and continued working in San Francisco. While chasing crooks, Calvin's powers went haywire again. He accidentally killed a pedestrian with his optic blast. Instead of prison time, he was offered a spot on Norman Osborn's personal X-Men team. Osborn was the new head of Hammer at the time, just so you know. Calvin took the deal, because why wouldn't you take that deal? Joining Osborn's X-Men, he got a new costume and a major shave, so goodbye to the long hair, beard, mustache, and sideburns. For the public image. Being hailed as a hero on TV boosted his belief that he was finally the good guy he was meant to be, though working with his teammates was rough. During an interrogation, his teammate, Weapon Omega, yelled at him, saying, "This is our personal hell." It's just a little dramatic. Despite the instability of the team, Calvin got along with most of them because he genuinely believed they were doing the right thing. After a week of protecting the city, they were attacked by the real X-Men. During the fight, Emma Frost turned traitor, which, surprise, surprise. When a confused Calvin started questioning what was going on, Namor Mackenzie, the submariner, also betrayed Osborn and knocked Calvin out. It's rumored that Namor left Calvin unconscious because he was too far gone in Osborn's lies to be convinced to switch sides, and he was too powerful to fight. When the X-Men left their New Mutant island Utopia, which was formerly Asteroid M, the Mimic joined the rest of Osborn's crew to take them down. He was totally overwhelmed by the number of mutants and got taken out by a group. Osborn eventually retreated, spinning the loss as a victory by saying the mutant terrorists had left U.S. soil. The Mimic remained a smiling, government-approved member of Osborn's newly presented X-Men team. Under Osborn, with Mystique leading, the Mimic stayed on Osborn's X-Men, but his depression was worsening. On a mission, the team found X-Man, who is Nate Gray, who was trapped in various consciousness. During the fight, the Mimic accidentally copied X-Man's abilities and had a horrifying vision of his own future. He would kill his wife Vera and their newborn baby with his optic blasts. He had to take down a mind-controlled Omega, and though Osborn's people managed to make the chaotic event look like a victory, they even built statues of Mimic and Omega. The vision made Calvin even more unstable. X-Man tried to teach him to use his new precognitive ability, but Calvin couldn't tame his inner demons. Later, when the X-Man attacked Osborn, Calvin was paralyzed by the thought of his recent life choices and whispered to himself, "I was an X-Man once." Ultimately, his power was used to help Osborn drain X-Man and take him into custody, a choice they'll all immediately regret. During the siege of Asgard, Calvin escaped with Omega, who had become his only friend. Omega was getting weaker from leeching powers, and Calvin carried him to Hank McCoy to help, knowing Hank had helped him before. They showed up at Wolverine's new school with a troubled Omega in tow. Omega was dying because he couldn't stop taking mutant energy. They tried everything to cure him, including having Mimic and Rogue absorb his excess energy. But this backfired, turning all of them into living power bombs about to explode. Omega made one last attempt to save them all by reabsorbing the energy, planning to sacrifice himself. Calvin refused to let him go, begging him to live on for him, if not for himself. Omega agreed to be put in an artificial coma. Mimicking Rachel Gray's telepathy, the Mimic gently put his best friend to sleep so the energy could gradually leave his body. Calvin realized his happiest moments were at the school and asked to stay to keep an eye on Omega. Rogue agreed, thinking he'd make a great teacher, and Calvin Rankin officially joined the X-Men after all these years. Now a member of the X-Men, the Mimic was immediately thrown into the Avengers versus X-Men war. He instantly sided with his new friends, offering to fight She-Hulk despite his last Hulk power absorption nearly killing him, but he ended up fighting the Falcon instead. Later, he and the recovering Omega were helping the hurricane cleanup in Montana when they were approached by the mutant Forget-Me-Not, who wanted Omega to remove his powers so people could finally remember he existed. If you want to know more about Forget-Me-Not and his tragic story, just look on my page because I have a breakdown of him too. Before they could explain the risks, Cyclops' X-Men group showed up and wanting them to join their cause. Mimic and Omega refused and a fight broke out. Forget-Me-Not then convinced them to copy his powers so they would become invisible and, crucially, unforgettable to Cyclops' team. They teleported away, instantly forgetting the entire encounter. Omega then explained to Forget-Me-Not that stripping his powers would erase his whole history. Convinced, Forget-Me-Not turned away, which made Mimic and Omega forget him again, and they flew off. When a younger version of Cable tried to send the time-displaced young X-Men back to their era, he kidnapped Calvin. Why? For his wings. They were perfect genetic copies of Angel's original wings, and Kid Cable needed them to replace the young Angel's enhanced metal wings so he could return to the past normally. As the X-Men stormed Cable's base, they found Calvin captive and brought him along to fight the villain Ahab. When Ahab finally reached the remaining X-Men, he ran the young Cyclops through with a spear. But surprise! It was actually the Mimic in disguise, preventing the future that Kid Cable was trying to stop. Calvin was later confirmed to have survived the attack. He then moved to the new mutant nation of Krakoa, where it was theorized that he might be a good stand-in for the Five, a group of mutants responsible for the resurrection process should one of them ever be killed. and like a lot of them were killed. A lot. So, as usual, I have some comics for you to check out to get to know Mimic even better. So, I would say, to get to know him better, X-Men number 19, Dark X-Men, The Beginning, number 1, X-Men number 26, X-Men number 27, X-Men number 28, and X-Men number 29. I think that gives you a pretty good look at who he is and makes you more familiar with Calvin Rankin. So, if you liked this episode, be sure to like and subscribe. I do hope you liked this episode because it was a fun one to do. So, with that being said, have a marvelous day.